morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of voice of radio. So today, we need to continue our look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game with the set that probably changed more than any other set we've ever had. No, I am not exaggerating. In terms of playability, this introduced a couple of monster decks and very few other good cards. But in terms of changing the Pokemon trading card game, oh my goodness, this was impactful. I usually have a little bit of a list of bullet points about interesting facts about the set, followed by a list of good cards and good decks when I'm planning out this. And there are so many notes I've got here, all about everything that Diamond and Pearl changed. Let's get rolling, shall we? Now, as the name might suggest, this was a set that was released to coincide with the release of the Diamond and Pearl video games on Nintendo DS. This was the beginning of Gen 4, and now Gen 4 actually started TCG-wise in Japan on the 20th of November 2006, and in English on May the 23rd, 2007, coinciding roughly with the release of the games. Now, of course, because we're introducing a new generation here, we introduced a lot of new Pokemon. According to the lovely folks over at Bulbapedia, a very nice website I use for my research, this set introduced 55 new Pokemon, like the box legendaries, Dialga and Palkia. You shouldn't be surprised about that, incidentally, because, well, it's a new set, based around new games. They are definitely going to introduce a lot of Pokemon, and we're going to see a bunch introduced over the next few sets as well. Now, with new sets, we often get new layouts, and we do here as well. I'm not going to sit here and pedantically pick at every single change, but we can have a look, for instance, at the Gengar from Legend Maker, side by side with the Gengar from this set, and you can see exactly how things are different. The Stage 2 Evolve from Haunter is in a different place on the card. Those little dots at the top and the left-hand side have gone away. But the coolest change, flavor text is back, baby! If you have a look there underneath the Gengar from this set, number 094, Shadow Pokemon, height 4'11", weight 89.3 pounds. And then as we go down towards the bottom of the card, there is actual flavor text, as in just a little bit of stuff to give flavour to the card. It hides in shadows. It is said that if Gengar is hiding, it cools the area by nearly 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, they originally took this flavour text away. We last saw it in Neo Destiny. I don't know, here's a Dark Crobat card that shows what they used to look like with the old flavour text. But they took it away in Expedition, and the reason was extremely simple. They introduced the e-reader cards. So like this Umbreon, for instance, nice example of an e-reader card. You've got that little strip with all the information there, and although some of these Pokemon did have their height, length, etc., they didn't have the actual flavor text. And to be honest, they took out the height and weight and all of that in some sets as well. And the reason was you essentially scan this through the e-reader, and it would give you that information. Now, the e-reader went away a while ago, and they finally brought it back here. Of course, the e-reader was also the reason they gave for putting packs of Pokemon cards from 10 down to 9 cards per pack, and they finally put it back up to 10 cards in this set. Admittedly, a couple of years after the e-reader got retired, but that's not the point, ladies and gentlemen. That's not the point. But yeah, we did have 10 cards per pack here. That was awesome. Of course, the other cool thing you can notice from the cards here, Pokemon actually have levels. So the Gengar is level 39. The Palkia I showed you earlier is level 67. The Dialga is level 68. Proving once again that you should all have gone for Diamond, not Pearl. I did, and I regret nothing. Speaking of levels, we introduced Lv.X Pokemon. Pokemon EXs, gone. Pokemon Stars, gone. They were retired with the advent of Diamond and Pearl, and the only what I like to call chase cards, special cards, call them what you will, were Lv.Xs. And we had 3 in the set. We had Empoleon, we had Torterra, and we have Infernape. And yes, I listed them in order of the coolness of the first partner Pokemon. We had 3 level X's and they were the first partner Pokemon. As a cool little side note, these same cards would later be released in tins, though they would all have alternate artwork. The coolest one was blatantly Empoleon, but actually in terms of playability, the only one that saw serious play was Infernape. And Infernape for a short period of time was one of the best decks in the game. We'll get there in a moment. Now, level X's were very weird cards. They were level up cards. They were like evolutions. So they followed the rule of evolution. You had to have been down for a turn. You couldn't do it the turn you had already evolved. But you had to be in the active in order to evolve. But what was really cool was that you would keep all of the attacks and abilities of your previous stage. So Empoleon Level X had the Pokemon Power Supreme Command and the attack Hydro Impact, but could also use the attacks Ice Blade and Aqua Jet of the regular Empoleon. It was very important to note, and this did really tax the deck building powers of a lot of people, by which I mean everyone. They were considered to be Pokemon of the same name. So even though Empoleon Level X evolved from Empoleon, you couldn't play 4 of each. You could play 4 in combination. So you would either have a 2-2 split or a 3-1 split. And I still see people arguing over which of those is correct in various decks of the era. And I know that some of you that have been playing only more recently might look at this and go, Wassy, you're talking about essentially a stage 3 Pokemon, an evolution from a stage 2. Surely they'd never be good? Oh, it was a very different game back then, ladies and gentlemen. It was a little bit slower at the time, but we're going to get some cards in the next few sets that help out evolution decks in a ridiculous manner. It is also worth noting that back then, Rare Candy allowed you to evolve a basic straight into a stage 2, even if you hadn't had it down for a turn. It was a little bit nuts. So, they were the Level X's. They were very, very cool new cards. And of course, it's interesting to note that Level X's were single prize Pokemon. So, as soon as we lost the sets with the EXs, which would happen 1 year later, we ended up in a situation where we actually went back to everyone taking 6 KOs in order to win the game. Now, the other thing that was super interesting here was that we introduced free attacks for which you didn't have to pay any energy. Now, in the Diamond and Pearl base set, the most relevant of these was actually Bidoof. It had the attack Errand Running, and you can see there's a little hollow circle there, which is basically no energy. Let you search the deck for a trainer card, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. Actually featured in a World Championships winning deck, but we'll get back to that in a moment. Now, Unknown came back in this set, but they now had their names. So in this set, we saw Unknown A, Unknown B, Unknown C, and Unknown D. And they were all considered different Pokemon. So you could play, well, let's just say an awful lot of Unknown in your deck. You would be able to play a huge amount of them because they all counted as different Pokemon with different names. None of these were particularly good, but in later sets we will see a couple of them that were, let's just say ridiculous, over the top, borderline, broken good, I think is fair to say. Now, there was a pre-release promo, it was Luxio, but what was really cool here was that this was the first time we ever saw staff promo cards. Now, staff promo cards are exactly the same as regular promo cards, except they've got staff printed on in gold letters. And they're given to tournament organisers, and they're generally handed out to judges and people helping to run the tournament. Interestingly enough, they are generally a little bit more valuable. I've staffed a bunch of events, I've got a bunch of staff cards. They're exactly the same, they've just got staff written on them. But they're cool, and you only get them when you work events. And they're more valuable, so they're better, quite frankly. They're better. Speaking of the Luxio line, we did see another one of those really cool things where at smaller tournaments like Cities, you would get yourself a Shinx. At slightly larger tournaments like States, you would get yourself a Luxio. And then when you went to Nationals, you'd get yourself a Luxray. So you could essentially build up the evolution line of promos as you went to larger tournaments throughout the years, which was cool. Now, what was not cool was that we got Bonsly and Mantike for the first time in this particular set. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, what's the debut of two of these lovely Pokemon? That sounds pretty cool. Yeah, these are the most recent Bondly and Mantike cards we've had. Now, Japan did have a couple of promos. I've done videos about these. I'll link them in the description. But as we sit here, as I record this in August 2020, we still haven't had another Mantike and Bondly. We've had two weird Japanese owners promos of them that were never properly released outside of Japan and weren't legal for Worlds and all of that, so they don't really count. Yeah, Bondly's crying. What's up with that? Why don't we have more of these cards? I wish I had an answer. Anytime anybody is moaning that their favourite Pokemon hasn't had a card recently, just show them Bondly and Mantike, and unless their favourite Pokemon is one of those two, they need to shush. Now, in terms of the most expensive cards ever, they are the Lv.X's, but honestly, you can pick them up for like $25. This was in that period, it was still pretty much kind of in, where the game was very, very popular. Lots of people are buying cards. Diamond and Pearl sold very well, and the Lv.X's, outside of Infernape for a short period, weren't terribly playable, and these just aren't particularly valuable cards. They're cool. No one's arguing that they're not cool, but they're not particularly valuable. They just happen to be the most valuable cards in the set. Now, in terms of theme decks, because we were talking about the first of a new generation, we do have 3 theme decks, one based around each of the first partner Pokemon, and this has now become a little bit of a theme, as in this happens every time. So Royal Frost was the Empoleon deck, focusing on water and metal Pokemon. You get yourself a Holo Empoleon, and then you get yourself non-holo versions of Floatzel and Noctowl. And worth pointing out, this Empoleon was a really, really good card, so this was a good theme deck to get. Terra Firma was a Grass Darkness deck, where you got yourself a holo version of Torterra, and non-holo versions of both Beautifly and Heracross. Now, of course, it is interesting to note here that this Torterra is the only one of the 3 that didn't really see any play. Although I did do a video recently about the best first partner Pokemon we'd ever had. I'll try and remember to link that one as well. Grass Pokemon are always the worst, I'm sorry. Not always, but over time, evening out, they're the worst. And Inferno Zone was a fire fighting deck, obviously built around Infernape. And you got yourself a holo Infernape, very good card, we'll get there in a minute. And non-holo versions of Medicham and Hippowdon. They were the other rares. Now, we can't go on and talk about the best cards here, because with a new block, this brought some significant changes to the game, and I mean proper job changes to the game. First of all, Poison Pokemon, which have been grass since the base set, all of a sudden turned into Psychic Pokemon. That's a gigantic change, ladies and gentlemen. We literally had like 30 sets with Poison Pokemon rocking up being Grass type, and now all of a sudden, they become Psychic. That's a huge change. Drapion is a nice example of this one. Drapion, of course, being a Poison Pokemon. Drapion would have been Grass had it been released earlier, which of course it couldn't have been, it was a Gen 4 Pokemon, but you get my point here. This was a pretty huge change. Of course, they've now actually turned into Darkness Pokemon, but we're not there yet. And we finally saw the introduction of Basic Metal and Basic Darkness Energy. Now, this was a huge deal, right? We introduced Darkness Pokemon and Metal Pokemon back in Neo Genesis. Neo Genesis was released in the year 2000 in English. Diamond and Pearl was released 7 years later. 6.5 if you want to be a pedant. So basically here, we'd had 6.5 years of sets with Darkness and Metal Pokemon, and the only energy they'd been allowed to play, at least to pay the Darkness and Metal costs of their attacks, was the special Darkness Energy and the special Metal Energy. And the special Darkness Energy and special Metal Energy were cool. They did extra stuff, doing more damage or reducing damage. But it took 6.5 years to get Basic Energy. That's a bit weird. Also, it's a weird little side note, but whereas all the energy in the set is listed alphabetically in terms of set order, they just whack Darkness and Metal on the end, rather than putting them in actual alphabetical order with the rest of the energy cards. Now, weakness and resistance also got messed around a little bit here. Again, if we use an example of an old card, let's go back to that Gengar. We've got a ×2 weakness and a -30 resistance, and that was the case. That was what Pokemon had. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, things were mixed around, and it wasn't uniform between all the different Pokemon. So if we have a look at Piplup, for instance, and you know I'm a bit of an Empoleon fanboy, we've got a +10 weakness to lightning. If we have a look at Prinplup, we've got a +20 weakness to lightning. If we have a look at Empoleon, we've got a +30 weakness. And if we have a look at Empoleon Lv.X, we've again got a +30 weakness. But we did actually have a couple ×2 weaknesses in here as well. The biggest, baddest Pokemon would come in with a ×2 weakness. But not in this set. In this set, nobody had more than a +30 weakness, which obviously makes a huge difference. A Pokemon hitting for 100 against an Empoleon with a ×2 weakness would hit 200. With a +30, they hit 130. That is a gigantic difference. Resistance also came down across the board to -20, as we can see on the Gengar I keep showing you. So resistance came down, and weakness came down as well. It made a little bit less of a difference, at least in this particular set. Like I say, ×2 weaknesses did come back, not for everybody, and not in this particular set. Now, we also saw that supporter and stadium cards weren't trainers now. It used to be that supporters and stadiums were subsets of trainer cards. Now they are actually their own separate types of cards. Again, this is another thing that got reversed later, but at the time, that's the way it was. And we also had some fairly important rule changes as well. Now, if you went first, on your first turn, you could draw a card. They reversed the rule that said you couldn't. But you were no longer allowed to play trainers, supporters, or stadium cards going first. So if you went first, you could draw a card, which you weren't able to before, but you couldn't play any trainer cards, which you were able to before. Generally, this meant that it was, with a few exceptions, beneficial to go second. All of a sudden, we flicked and we wanted to go second. And it's interesting to note that there was a coin flip at the time to decide who went first, and the winner of the flip had to go first. There was no, oh, I won the flip, I'll choose to go second. It was completely random. And the last big change was that fossils now did give up a prize when KO'd. So a deck like Politoed that would hit and then run to the bench whacking a claw fossil active, well, he could still do it, but claw fossil would give up a prize, so that was the end of those kind of decks, at least the ones that used fossils. I told you there was a lot going on in this set. We don't usually spend 18 minutes getting to the best cards, but that's how big and impactful this set was. But in terms of playable cards, there wasn't that much. Now, the Empoleon Lv.X might not have been great, but the Empoleon really was. 2 energy, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, you do 40 damage to that Pokemon. 3 energy, 70 damage, flip a coin. If heads, it did 20 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And you would use this with Scramble Energy and just kinda go nuts. It was one of the very best cards that became one of the very best decks around. And Infernape was also really good, and this one did use the Lv.X. So we had Infernape with Meteor Punch, 1 energy, 30 damage, flip a coin till you get tails, you do 30 for each heads. So it might not even do 30 damage, not ideal. 2 energy, 90, discard all fire energy from Infernape. It was nice, but you had to discard all the energy, so you had to get it back on there. As for the Lv.X, you had the Poker Power Burning Head. Once during your turn, you may look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put 1 in your hand and discard the other 2. So really nice for consistency and getting rolling. But then for 2 energy, 150 damage, search your discard pile for 8 fire energy and shuffle them into your deck. But if you don't have 8 fire energy to shuffle in, the attack fails. Hence why the poker power is so good, because hopefully you're discarding fire energy. And when this Lv.X has 120 HP, you can imagine how good it is doing 150 damage. The answer is very. And this one really benefited from Delcatty being reprinted in Power Keepers, the previous set. Because it's got the poker power energy draw. Once during your turn, you may discard 1 energy card from your hand and then draw 3 cards. So here, of course, you're constantly discarding energy with Delcatty and then drawing extra cards, which will hopefully include energy and cards to discard the energy. And then, of course, you got both Delcatty and Infernape Lv.X giving you extra consistency. It was a fairly redonkulous combination. Lucario was also a very, very nice card. At the time, we had a bunch of Pokemon like Cast Form, and obviously we've seen all the evolutions being really good. So fighting weakness was pretty gosh darn relevant. And Lucario looks underwhelming, but for a single energy, 30 damage. And it goes through resistance, which was useful. So you could just, for a single energy on a stage 1, so a very fast Pokemon to get rolling, just start running through all of these starter Pokemon. It was kind of nuts. Now 2 energy, 40 damage plus 20 on your opponent's bench was also quite nice. And sure, it didn't have the big hitting power, but you could end up playing Lucario with basically whatever you wanted. It was kind of awesome. Now we also saw a lot of love for Dusknoir. Dusknoir was the 4th and final card, and you'll notice that they're all evolved Pokemon here, and 3 of them are stage 2s, that really did make a difference and really was one of the best cards in the game. Now Dusknoir had the awesome poker power Dark Palm. Once during your turn, if your opponent has 4 or more bench Pokemon, you may choose one of them and shuffle that Pokemon and all cards attached to it into his or her deck. So not only did you basically reduce your opponent down to 4 bench Pokemon, but if they ever put a 5th down, you would get to choose which one got shuffled back into their deck, which was ridiculous. And we saw this as a tech in a bunch of decks. Yes, this was back in the days where you could actually tech in a stage 2. We saw it played in those Empoleon decks that did so gosh darn well, including the one that was printed as a Worlds deck because it got second in Seniors. We saw Jason Klaczynski play a tech line of this in the Gardevoir deck, with which he won the World Championships in 2008. So it got printed in multiple Worlds decks as a little tech. It was awesome. Now, it did have a nice little attack. You put 5 damage counters on the defending Pokemon. Then you counted the number of prize cards your opponent has taken and put that many on the defending Pokemon. So up to 10 damage counters. But it was largely just played as a tech for the poker power. And there wasn't a Dusknoir deck that did quite well, but it wasn't yet. And I mentioned that Bidgew earlier. This was actually really quite good. It got played in the Flyvies deck that won Worlds, which was kind of ridiculous. And it really was, because for 0 energy, you just got to search for a trainer card. And sure, you've got 40 HP, you're probably giving up a prize, but remember, this is back in the day of Scramble Energy, where giving up a prize would activate Scramble Energy and wouldn't be a bad thing. And essentially, you just sit there searching for trainer cards, you're not wasting any energy so you can put it elsewhere, and when Bidgew goes down, you get to activate Scramble Energy and get rolling with your stage 2s. Sounds alright to me, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Electivire was a nice little... It was a bit of a fringe deck. It was a deck, it saw a bunch of play, but it wasn't one of the very top decks. It had the Poker Power Intense Voltage, whereby if Elekid was anywhere under Electivire, you could move Lightning Energy from one of your Pokemon to Electivire, as often as you liked. And for 4 energy, you did 60 damage, but if you discarded all the Lightning, you did 120. And you generally would play this as a stage 2. You'd evolve it from Elekid, and you'd evolve it from the Electabuzz from Dragon Frontiers, which just let you draw a card from the bottom of your deck during your turn. It was a fun little rogue deck that saw play here and there. As was Machamp. Now, I've already told you that fighting weakness was relevant, so that was pretty gosh darn good. But Machamp for a single energy, 20 damage. If any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an attack last turn, you did 70. And for 3 energy, 60 damage. Heads, 90, and Confusion. Yeah, that ain't bad. The free energy kind of sucked, but you had a decent single energy attack there as well. And again, this wasn't a powerhouse deck, but it was a nice deck that saw play here and there around. Now, in terms of trainer cards, we did see some fun ones. We saw that Rowan and Rival saw their debuts in the set. Nice thematically for the video games, but they didn't really see any play. And I personally am quite a fan of Speed Stadium. Let you, well, either player during their turn flip until they got a tails, drawing one card for each heads. But it didn't really see a huge amount of play. Never mind. Now, in terms of the top decks, we'll go quickly. There were 3 really that came around from here that were awesome. Infernape Delcatty had a period of time, and it was generally through smaller tournaments. It had gone away by the time Nationals came around. But there was a period of time where this really was the best deck. And it was just as simple as you get your Infernape out, you get your Delcatty, you've got ridiculous consistency, and you should be basically one-hit KOing every Pokemon around. It was fast, consistent, and hard-hitting. It really was a kind of ridiculous deck. But it did get overpowered by other things fairly quickly. But there was a period of time where Battle Roads, the little tournaments at the time, were dominated by this. It is worth noting that Delcatty EX did see a bit of play here as well, because of the Poker Power constraint. Essentially, each player discarded cards until they had 6 cards in their hand. So it was really, really nice for just stopping your opponent ever getting too big of a hand. It was kind of cool. Now, Empoleon was the other really good one, and I do love that Infernape and Empoleon were the really good cards from this set, but I don't love that Torterra just was not, and it really wasn't on the same level. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes here. It could not compete. It wasn't as good. It was very sad. But Empoleon here really was. It was a deck in and of itself. Like, the World's deck that got printed literally just played Empoleon and Corsola. That was the only other card that made it into the deck at all. Now, it played Scramble Energy, which paid the energy more easily when you were behind on prizes. It played Cessation Crystal, which you would attach to Empoleon to turn off your opponent's Poker Powers. Also your own, and Poker Bodies. But it didn't matter because you didn't rely on any. And you would use Cursed Stone to drop 1 damage counter on each Pokemon with a Poker Power between turns. And essentially you were going, look, I'm a single prize deck. Remember, at the time, EXs hadn't rotated out. I'm a single prize deck. I hit quite hard. I've got quite high HP. I'm spreading damage around. And also, I am really punishing decks that use Poker Powers, because I'm not, but my opponent probably is. Interesting to note that Japanese players at Worlds, we did actually see Sugiyoshi Yamato, a very, very good player. He did lose out to the eventual winner, Tom Roos, but he did take 3rd place at Worlds with his Empoleon deck, and he did play a 1-0-1 line of Infernape. This was in there to counter those Sizzle decks, which we talked about previously, which were very popular in Japan at the time. I love Empoleon. I would have played this deck. I know I don't usually play the best decks, but I'd make an exception for Empoleon. The other deck, which I think is worth mentioning, was Lucario EVs. So we mentioned Lucario and how good that was, and you would just play it with the EVs we mentioned before. Vaporeon forced your opponent to shuffle their hand into their deck and draw a new hand of 6 cards. So essentially, you'd be sitting there going, tee-hee-hee, I've got a stage 1 with a single energy, I'm set up super quickly, and then I'm just going to sit here and disrupt you with Vaporeon. Or maybe I'm going to play Jolteon to spread a bit of damage around. When I've done a bit of damage, I'm going to use Espeon to devolve your Pokemon so they get KO'd because they got enough damage on to be KO'd. Maybe I'm going to use Flareon to drag one of your bench Pokemon active and leave them burned and confused. There were a bunch of different EVs we could use. It was very much an EVs deck, even down to the point where, yes, we would be playing Lv.X as, well, kind of a Pokemon to do big damage in the late game when you spread enough damage, and for the Poker Power to move damage around. And it was Lucario. Lucario was awesome, but Lucario was better with Eevees, I think is fair to say. Very, very cool deck. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That was Diamond and Pearl. It changed so much about the game. It changed the rules. It changed typings, weakness, resistance. It got rid of multiple prize Pokemon. It brought in Lv.X's. It was a huge important set. And it might really have just brought in a couple of decks, one of which lasted a few months, the other was gone in a year's time. Empoleon did do amazingly at Worlds in 2008, but it wasn't the same Empoleon. But I tell you what, in terms of historical impact, you'd be hard-pressed to find any set that changed as much or had as big an impact as Diamond and Pearl. So that's everything you need to know. Quite a lot to get through, but I think we did a pretty good job. And as always, I'd like to hear from you guys. Your memories if you played, your thoughts if you didn't. Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.